in your professional life, in your working as a head of growth, do you keep like the social thing separate from that, in your actual day-to-day job? Or is it something where these things inform your everyday life? How does it work?
Yeah, so of course there are ways in which they intersect and ways in which they don't.
Mm,
And this comes both from internal and external. So of
mm,
course, like when you're working as a global brand, we do think about these things, and we do think about, okay, what are some guidelines that we have and things that we don't want to do, no matter how much money is involved, and things that we do
mm,
want to do. So there are, like, in this sense, it's a huge advantage being in a company where the brand is so central. So it does
mm,
have an effect. However, I'm also like, one thing that I kind of decided to leave behind is, how do I put this? Like, I will definitely point out things that I think could be helpful, but also I've seen and I've experienced myself, and like, it's not good when, like, let's say outsiders in the heterogeneous environment take upon themselves to fix all the uh, perceived problems inside the company. Like, let's put it this way. I don't like it when the I word is somehow something that the marginalized people in an organization take upon themselves. Because
mm,
the reality is it's actually not gonna help them. And it's very, like, they take so much, um, work upon themselves and so much pressure to kind of fix these things, where in reality, this should be something that comes from leadership and is done with professionals. I really don't like the trend towards kind of making basically people in the organization do unpaid DI labor. It's also one
mm,
reason why I'm not a big fan of employee resource groups. And of course, they have their place and they might work.
mm,
But
mm.
also, I'm like, hey, if you are serious about DNI, pay people, put it in the OKRs. They are evaluated on and like compensated on the DI work as well.
Mm.
And it's not
Yeah.
something that they just have to do on the side. And then people, like, their managers, like, oh, but you're wasting a lot of time with this. Aren't you? Like, what about your other goals? I've seen it happen. Not a
Mm,
fan. So
mm,
in that sense,
yeah.
I'd rather keep these things in a way more separate. I will still, like, speak up about things that I think are important. And
Mm,
I have to say there are, like, very open conversations, so that's not a problem. But I also don't, I tried it
mm,
to be like the internal force for change in organizations. And I'm like, no, if the leadership is the one that needs to be, we want this and we are going to put money and effort into this. Otherwise, you're just going to burn out and you're going to put yourself in a very no great place.
mm.
And this is based on experience.
It's kind of funny that you say this because, all right, so I worked with different ERGs, different companies and such, and I am say agnostic towards it in terms of the format, but I wholeheartedly agree with you with this whole idea that like people need to be compensated for this. Like, I don't believe in like those employee resource groups where these are project management groups.
Mm.
I think when it comes to actually doing any kind of work or labor or something where you have like an actual, if there is a project or program that you're managing, that's not a volunteer thing. That's not something you should be, expecting anything from. I think ERGs or employee resource groups are really good for in two ways. Like one is like a support group kind of situation. I think that's a great thing to have if you want to have like support communities and such. That makes sense. If you want to have it as like a consulting kind of group where people can give their opinions upwards or outwards to different people, or they can share their perspectives and their thoughts and their opinions and things to inform things, to make things better in that sense. But it's not like they have the responsibility of carrying it forward themselves, but just kind of a way of consolidating, perhaps in an anonymous way, their opinions and perspectives like that. Fantastic.
Very rare
Um,
though.
I know those ones are not often,
No.
done in that way,
Yes,
to be honest.
I'm thinking
Yeah.
about, like, even like previous company,
Mm.
the women set up as a group for women and the CEO joined. Male CEO, of course. So much
Well,
for like open support
yeah,
conversations.
yeah. So that it has to be really, really clear what it's for, because like, let's say for instance, I mean, I've seen a lot of CEOs who are like, hey, I want to join this minoritized group's, support group and community, but I want to show that I'm supporting them.
Yeah.
but they don't
No,
understand.
and that's not the reason. The reason is making sure, what are you talking inside this group? I need to know. That was not the reason. It was not a supportive reason. But I agree. I think in general, the level of maturity often is not there into thinking more critically about these things. And I know, especially in Finland, the level of maturity of DNA inside the organization is really, really low. I know of companies, not everybody, but I know many companies where, the idea of D&I is white women only, basically. Or there is no kind of interrogation about, hey, what about our actual business? How are we making the money? Who is how are we building the product? All of these things. Very often it's we are not at this kind of level of maturity yet. However, it's improving. Yeah. And I also think that it needs to continue. It's this conversation needs to continue happening, and we need to keep pushing in that direction. It's not enough to just this is bad, so we don't do anything about it. Of course not.
I love when I see a company that's willing to consider, how do we integrate these things into our organization? I am not a person who thinks you need to have, for instance, a DEI person per se. I think you need to have DEI as a process and as an accountability with your actual organization, I think it's something where it has to be part of your culture. It's in the same way, I think it's a little bit silly to say this is the person who's responsible for our organization culture, or this person who's they're responsible for our organization's strategy and such. Everybody should be doing those things. That's
I agree.
The things that should exist throughout, but to not say everybody and actually mean nobody, you have to mean you have accountability built in. You have to have objectives and targets, or you have to have these guideposts. And when you realize if you go in this direction, that's not the right way, and you're going to course correct in some ways. There has to be, and if you're doing well, you want to make certain to have some built-in rewards or incentives and such.
Yes.
I think that's kind of how that is. If you want to make a business where you're trying to do better by all the people that you're reaching and impacting and touching, if you want to make sure that you're doing better by more people, and you want to make sure that you're consistent about that, then you have to have it integrated. It's not something that you can have one person in their little island being able to say, by the way, you should do better. That's usually not going to do anything at all.
No, it's not going to do. And then usually it's a HR person who is definitely not the person that should be doing this. So
HR needs to be in this as well. They definitely have a role. That's definitely a thing. But if you're talking about things diversity, and your talent acquisition is not a part of it, that's weird. If you're talking about things like diversity and your marketing and your salespeople are not a part of it, that's kind of weird. Absolutely. If you're talking about things like inclusion and, your team leads don't have any idea how to be able to welcome different kinds of people in your organization, if you don't know how to have an inclusive interview to make certain that you're not simply screening out people just because they might be neurodiverse or have different kinds of realities, then, it's not going to fly. It's just not, So you have to make certain that everybody has some idea of, how can you work with that person next to you? How can you work with the people in your team, in your company, in your community, in your world, and the folks that you're trying to, the areas that you're trying to reach and impact? Understand those people. Make sure you're doing right by them, not just what you think you want, not just pushing something onto folks and doing it your way, specifically, exclusively, thinking about how you could do that with these people. Yeah. That's the way you have to kind of change the mentality within the working space. But that's my thoughts on it. I'm biased completely.
But I 100% agree with you. And there is also a spectrum between doing nothing or doing terrible things and doing amazing. Hopefully we can kind of also find a place for, getting started and doing some things. It doesn't have to be perfect from day one.
And incremental progress is something. In my circle, I have a lot of folks who are either complete radicals who are yes, burn the system down, get rid of things and such and everything. Or the folks who are no, let's hold hands and such, and we'll, and pat people on the back and such and all that, ease our way. And I'm somewhere in the middle. I think there's definitely space for you can do both. You can help people through what exists while you're building something completely new. I think those things can coexist. I think I would love it to not be such a thing in terms of like within our own camp of change makers, like it has to be one or the other. I think it can actually be, Schrödinger's progress. You can have progress that takes place incrementally and radically. I think those things both have to exist.
And both are needed. I think you need both people that are like absolutely, radical, knowing what they're after, and people who are willing to like kind of do this legwork on the short term gains. Like realistically, to change things, both are needed. Like it's gonna be just one or the other. And these two kind of can compensate and like push each other in different ways. Because at the end of the day, like we need, like having this conversation is essential.
So where I fall within the camps of change makers and such, I'm a person who is oftentimes, I work with data and strategy oftentimes, and I love the interpersonal side of things. So like, I haven't yet found a really good role where I can combine both these things very, very well. And I'm, if I find that, I'll jump on it certainly, but I love to be able to like, I do love the relational side of it because I think that's where you can actually see and feel and make more of it and like that real concrete impact that you can experience that. I love that. That's just a great thing to see people's actual day-to-day lives changing. But you want to make certain that you don't just do like window dressing, like my background's in comms, by the way. So like, in comms and marketing, you have this whole thing where they'll say, hey, look, we're going to like showcase different people at certain times. We'll have like a special day. What is it the day where these people matter? And the other 364 days,
I hate that so much.
Like I'm this weird person who, if you have a logo, I wouldn't change it for like, a particular month or something like this. I'm like, hey, you have this kind of thing, and you're going to change that, and we're going to care about these people for this month. My thought is, if your brand doesn't care about people year round, don't pretend like you care. Like
I know,
don't do it.
The hypocrisy is what I hate. Like, I don't care what you do with your logo, but like, I want to see actions. And if I know that your actions don't match with your logo, I'm going to be pissed.
Like I've seen some toxic places, like, we're going to, like,
we are going to slap a rainbow on it, or like, some other things. It's ridiculous. I hate it.
There's one company I know they operate in a place literally where like it's illegal to be gay, and they get money from this place and they don't have support necessarily for people in that place who happen to be gay. And you're going to change your logo for pride? Like, like, why? Why would you, like, what would this even be about? What's the purpose of that? Like, what are you even trying to say at that point? Yeah. So like things like this, I would rather, instead of having like those kind of shows, I want to see like, just tell me what you did. Like, how are your people doing? How are those people from that group? Like, maybe that's a good accountability point instead of having it being like the promo point. Like, have it be the accountability point where you're like, hey, look, this group here, we have like Black History Month instead of talking about like that. Talk about, hey, these are how our Black people are doing. In fact, like they're thriving. They got this kind of thing. These are the stories, perspectives from those folks. This is how they've been growing and being supported. We have, if you have things for pride, fantastic. How are your LGBTQ plus folks doing in your organization? How are you supporting? What kind of, process? What are your policies? What are your practices? What are your structures? When you have people like for accessibility, don't just have like disability day, how have you actually like built this stuff in? Talk about that. I would love to hear that. See, that's,
I 100% agree. And I think that's also like why my, like, let's say the things that I do are so much rooted in very small practical ways. Mm-hmm. So I know where I can have impact. I do that. Everything else is like, because I'm like, what is more impactful? Is like, I can offer my expertise to somebody and hopefully help them out in a practical way. Or I can like, do a lot of window dressing.